We are restarting Savitri, Part 1, Books 1 to 3. Book 1, The Book of Beginnings. Canto 1, The Symbol Dawn. Well, let's start with the publisher's note, because again it gives you an idea of how Savitri was written. The writing of Savitri extended over much of later part of Sri Aurobindo's life. The earliest known manuscript is dated 1916. The original narrative poem was recast several times in the first phase of composition. By around 1930, Sri Aurobindo had begun to turn it into an epic with a larger scope and a deeper significance. So, first known manuscript 1916, then he began to turn it into an epic when? In 1930. So, what is the intervening period? How many years?
14.
Right. And with a larger scope and deeper significance, transformed into a legend and a symbol. Savitri became his major literary work, which he continued to expand and perfect until his last days. In the late 1940s, when his eyesight was failing, he took the help of a scribe and dictated the extensive final stages of revision. So much like Ganesha was the scribe of who? Vyasa. Who was the scribe here? Dr. Nirodharan. Separate cantos started to appear in print in 1946. Part 1 of the first edition was published in 1950. The next year, after Sri Aurobindo's passing, so the first part was published in 1950 while he was still, because he passed away 5th of December. This was obviously early part of 1950. So the first manuscript, the first part 1 of the first edition was published in 1950. The next year after Sri Aurobindo's passing, the rest of the poem was brought out in a second volume. So it is part 1 and part 2. The present text is that of the fourth revised edition, which came out in 1993. Each line has been checked to eliminate any unintentional discrepancies between the final manuscript or dictation and the printed form of the poem. I remember I used to be visiting the ashram and Nirodha's room very often, meeting him, when every time I'd say, "Where are you going?" "Oh, we have to go for Savitri." So it was Nirodha, Amal Kiran, Richard Hartz, and a team, Deshpande joined later, who sat down together and revised and looked through all his manuscripts, especially Nirodha's writing and Sri Aurobindo's, and made the corrections. But there were some mad hatters, as you know, in the ashram, who put a case against this particular manuscript, this book, saying that how can you change a single word? These are the actual errors, they're mistakes, nobody's changing anything. And that case, of course, was dismissed. So, now we come to the author's note. The tale of Satyavan and Savitri is recited in the Mahabharata as a story of conjugal love conquering death. But this legend is, as shown by many features of the human tale, one of the many symbolic myths of the Vedic cycle. Now this is very important. Even this legend, Satyavan and Savitri, as written in the Mahabharata, that itself is a symbolic myth of the Vedic cycle. What does that mean? During the Vedas, the Vedas were not written in a simple form. Everything was camouflaged and hidden within symbols. Why was that done? So that the truth could be protected from those who were ignorant enough to misuse it, and the idea of the mysticism, the Vedic rishis that were very high in consciousness, they wanted to keep this knowledge protected for posterity. So this was itself a symbolic myth. Now many people think that Sri Aurobindo has changed it into a symbol. But the idea that you have to understand is that even the original story of Savitri and Satyavan is symbolic. It's a symbolic myth of the Vedas. Very important. And then later, of course, it appears as a story in the Mahabharata. So this extremely important chronology has to be kept in mind. Then only you will understand the deeper significance of Savitri. So you say, oh, he's changed conjugal love. Even this conjugal love, it was a symbol. Try and understand that. So, but this legend is, as shown by many features of the human tale, one of the many symbolic myths of the Vedic cycle. Satyavan is the soul carrying the divine truth of being. So what is the symbol? Who is Satyavan? Satyavan is the soul carrying the divine truth of being within itself, but descended into the grip of death and ignorance. Savitri is the divine word, the incarnate word, daughter of the sun, Surya, goddess of the supreme truth, who comes down and is born to save. Ashwapati, the lord of the horse, her human father, is the lord of tapasya, the concentrated energy of spiritual endeavor that helps us to rise from the mortal to the immortal planes. Dyumatsena, lord of the shining hosts, father of Satyavan, is the divine mind, here fallen blind. So who is Dyumatsena? Lord of the shining hosts. What is the shining host referred to? Father of Satyavan is the divine mind here fallen blind. So the original divine mind, which when it comes to the earth becomes our ignorant mind, is a symbol of that divine mind. Who is the symbol of that divine mind? Dyumatsena. Dyumatsena, Lord of the shining hosts, Father of Satyavan, is the divine mind here fallen blind, losing its celestial kingdom of vision. So when the mind falls into the earth consciousness and becomes our human mind, what does it first lose? It loses its vision, that means the truth vision, loses celestial kingdom of vision, and through that loss, its kingdom of glory. Still, this is not a mere allegory. What is an allegory? Slight difference between an allegory and a symbol. What is it? Still, this is not a mere allegory. The characters are not personified qualities. So that is what an allegory is. They are personified qualities. That means they do not exist. While what Sri Aurobindo is saying, that they are prototypes. They do exist. They are not allegory. They are not personified qualities. Still, this is not a mere allegory. The characters are not personified qualities. But who are they? Incarnations or emanations of living and conscious forces. Very important. The characters are incarnations or emanations. You understand what incarnations and emanations mean? Of living and conscious forces with whom we can enter into concrete touch. So that is why they're not mere personified qualities. We can enter into a concrete relationship. We can come to see them. We can come to know them. And they take human bodies, conscious forces, who are incarnations or emanations, take human bodies in order to help man and show him the way from his mortal state to a divine consciousness and immortal life. Sri Aurobindo. That's why they're not allegories, they're actual incarnations and emanations that take human bodies, take human shape. They come down on earth to show man the way towards a conscious life and immortality. Let's start the symbol dawn. It was the hour before the gods awake. Across the path of the divine event, the huge foreboding mind of night, alone in her unlit temple of eternity, lay stretched immobile upon silence's marge. Almost one felt opaque, impenetrable, in the somber symbol of her eyeless muse, the abyssum of the unbodied infinite. So who lay stretched immobile upon silence's marge? The huge foreboding mind of night. Do you know who the mind of night is? Inconscient. That was the mind of night. Lay stretched immobile upon silence's marge. It was the hour before the gods awake. What do the gods symbolize? Consciousness. So this is the unconscious, the inconscient. Lay stretched immobile upon silence's marge. Almost one felt opaque, impenetrable, in the somber symbol of her eyeless muse, the abyssum of the unbodied infinite. A fathomless zero occupied the world, a power of fallen, boundless self awake between the first and the last nothingness, recalling the tenebrous womb from which it came, turned from the insoluble mystery of birth and the tardy process of mortality, and longed to reach its end in vacant naught, as in a dark beginning of all things, a mute, featureless semblance of the unknown, repeating forever the unconscious act, prolonging forever the unseeing will, cradled to the cosmic drowse of ignorant force, whose moved creative slumber kindles the suns and carries our lives in its somnambulist whirl, athwart the vain enormous trance of space, its formless stupor without mind or life, a shadow spinning through a soulless void, thrown back once more into unthinking dreams, earth wheeled abandoned in the hollow gulfs, forgetful of her spirit and her fate. So you can see the first few lines describing the whole cosmos. It's really a cosmic beginning. It's really fitting and epic. How Sri Aurobindo is talking from the beginnings of creation, when mind lay sleeping in her eyeless muse, and slowly how the earth is wheeling, forgetful of her spirit and her fate and her destiny, how she will become a very important center of evolution and conscious life. So forgetful of that. This is the time before the gods awake. And all of this wonderful description in poetic language, of the origins of creation. So in a way, what Mother says, everything is contained in Savitri. All of the history of the earth, the universe, the beginnings, the middle and the end. So you can see in this poetic language, and of course, many commentaries on the first, paragraph and the first canto have been written, and most of the main commentators have said that one of the most difficult cantos in Savitri, both in terms of the poetic language and the vast scope far beyond the human mind, and also because of the meaning of what Sri Aurobindo is saying, in this poetic form. So, this is something that will take time. Cradled the cosmic drowse of ignorant force, whose moved creative slumber kindles the suns. Now, whose moved creative slumber kindles the suns and carries our lives in its somnambulist whirl, athwart the vain enormous trance of space, its formless stupor without mind or life, space without mind or life, a shadow spinning through a soulless void, thrown back once more into unthinking dreams, earth wheeled abandoned in the hollow gulfs, forgetful of her spirit and her fate. The impassive skies were neutral, empty, still. Then something in the inscrutable darkness stirred, a nameless movement, an unthought idea, insistent, dissatisfied, without an aim, something that wished but knew not how to be, teased the inconscient to wake ignorance. Now, have you understood what that means? A throe that came and left a quivering trace, gave room for an old tired want, unfilled, at peace in its subconscient moonless cave, to raise its head and look for absent light, straining closed eyes of vanished memory, like one who searches for a bygone self and only meets the corpse of his desire. It was as though even in this naught's profound, even in this ultimate dissolution's core, there lurked an unremembering entity, survivor of a slain and buried past, condemned to resume the effort and the pang, reviving in another frustrate world. An unshaped consciousness, desired light. What was that was desiring this light? An unshaped consciousness. And a blank prescience yearned towards distant change. That's why now you understand how difficult this passage is. So, there is this movement in the inconscient to wake ignorance. You can imagine how dark inconscient is, that ignorance is a slightly higher, because ignorance implies some movement towards consciousness. Yeah. So insistent, dissatisfied, without an aim, something that wished but knew not how to be. What is that something? That is the ignorance, as an I, with a capital I. You see the word ignorance here spelled with a capital I, not a small I. Big difference. Insistent, dissatisfied, without an aim, something that wished but knew not how to be, tease the inconscient, to wake ignorance. A throe that came and left a quivering trace, gave room for an old, tired want unfilled. At peace in subconscient, moonless cave. You have to know the planes of consciousness before you understand this. Inconscient, subconscient, ignorance, and so on. There are many other planes. But here it is. It's very clear what Sri Aurobindo is saying. Yeah. So inconscient is the lowest. A throe that came and left a quivering trace, gave room for an old tired want unfilled, at peace in its subconscient moonless cave, to raise its head and look for absent light. Straining, so what was in the subconscious moonless cave? Ignorance. At peace in its subconscious moonless cave, to raise its head and look for absent light. Straining closed eyes of vanished memory, like one who searches for a bygone self and only meets the corpse of his desire. It was as though even in this naught's profound, this zero naught, even in this ultimate disillusion's core, there lurked an unremembering entity. Unremembering entity. There lurked, even in this absolute disillusion's core, this complete nihil, this zero, this naught's profound, there lurked an unremembering entity, an entity that did not remember itself. Survivor of a slain. And this entity was what? The survivor of a slain and buried past, condemned to resume the effort and the bank, reviving in another frustrate world. An unshaped consciousness, desired light, and a blank prescience yearned towards distant change. As if a childlike finger laid on a cheek reminded of the endless need in things and the heedless mother of the universe. So as if a childlike finger laid on a cheek reminded of the endless need in things, the heedless mother of the universe. Heedless mother of the universe. And don't forget it was the time before the gods awake. An infant longing clutched the somber vast. So this infant, as though it was, what is this infant here he's mentioning? An infant longing, this first consciousness of the first ever, from the total inconscient to first ever consciousness. An infant longing clutched the somber vast. Insensibly, somewhere a breach began. A long, lone line of hesitating hue, like a vague smile tempting a desert heart, troubled the far rim of life's obscure sleep. Arrived from the other side of boundlessness, an eye of deity peered through the dumb deeps, a scout in a reconnaissance from the sun. It seemed amid a heavy cosmic rest, the toper of a sick and weary world, to seek for a spirit soul and desolate, too fallen to recollect forgotten bliss. Intervening in a mindless universe, its message crept through the reluctant hush, calling the adventure of consciousness and joy, and conquering nature's disillusioned breast, compelled renewed consent to see and feel. A thought was sown in the unsounded void. A sense was born within the darkness's depths. A memory quivered in the heart of time, as if a soul long dead were moved to live. But the oblivion that succeeds the fall had blotted the crowded tablets of the past, and all that was destroyed must be rebuilt, and old experience labored out once more. And then comes the wonderful line, which is the mantra of the Gnostic center. What is it? All can be done if the God touch is there. So this is where it occurs in Savitri. Yes, why don't you read them out? It'll be very useful. Yeah, it'll be very useful. It's very difficult, this passage. I mean, it's too pregnant with too much.
The first line refers to the condition of the world before the gods were born. Sri Aurobindo says it was the hour before the gods awaked. As a result of the separation between the first emanations and their origin, the creation by these first emanations had become obscure, inconscient. And that is what Sri Aurobindo describes here.
So what are the first emanations?
The four emanations.
What are they? Just tell them for the rest of the group.
The first was consciousness, consciousness and light. And by cutting himself from his origin, he went down and down towards unconsciousness.
Right.
The second was bliss and turned into suffering. The third was truth and turned into
falsehood.
One was life and turned into death. Mother says there is an ancient tradition which describes the creation as done by some first emanations of the Supreme Mother, who were four emanations. In the sense and the feeling of their supreme power, they cut connection with their origin and became independent. And then these emanations, being separated from their origin, entered into darkness. So consciousness became the inconscient.
So, this is of course a way of explaining it. Very simple very simple way of explaining it. Of course, continue. Anything more?
So as a result of this separation between the first emanations and their origin, the creation by these first emanations had become obscure, inconscient. And that is what Sri Aurobindo describes here. He says the divine event, that is creation. The creation will go on and on for eternity. It started with what he called the night of a foreboding mind. It is unconscious, immobile, lifeless, blind. All these things, the obscurity and the unconsciousness, the immobility, lifelessness, the unbodied infinite, and a fathomless zero, all these words are meant to express the nothingness of the world. There are many more points.
Note absolute.
On the passages we have read till now.
You please read those if you wish to. They are all available on Incarnate Word under www.incarnateword.in. So, now this is important. As if a childlike finger laid on a cheek, reminded of the endless need in things, the heedless mother of the universe, an infant longing clutched the somber vast. Insensibly, somewhere a breach began. Any comment on this particular imagery?
Yeah, this is the waking up of consciousness that Sri Aurobindo compares to a smile. He says, hesitating hue. That is the first beginning of consciousness. It is like a very pale light, and he compares to a vague smile tempting a desert heart. It is like a very faint light at the border of the obscure sweep of light.
So it's the first thing of consciousness, the first awakening of consciousness, that's clear. Okay. It seemed amid a heavy cosmic rest, the torpor of a sick and weary world, to seek for a spirit, soul, and desolate, too fallen to recollect forgotten bliss. So this too fallen to recollect forgotten bliss will remind you of the separation of the four deities that actually separated from their original forms, and therefore went into this absolute night. What were the four deities or the four powers? Consciousness, bliss, light, and truth. So these four became their opposites. Yeah, but same thing. Light, life, love, they're all three similar. Okay. So every time you have to come out of ignorance or unconscious or unconsciousness, this is the same method, same imagery. the toper of a sick and weary world, to seek for a spirit soul and desolate, too fallen to recollect forgotten bliss. Intervening in a mindless universe, its message crept through the reluctant hush, calling the adventure of consciousness and joy. Who's this message of this? This forgotten bliss that became that it's too fallen to recollect forgotten bliss. Intervening in a mindless universe, its message crept through the reluctant hush, calling the adventure of consciousness and joy, and conquering nature's disillusioned breast, compelled renewed consent to see and feel. A thought was sown in the unsounded void. A thought was sown in the unsounded void. A sense was born within the darkness's depths. A memory quivered in the heart of time, as if a soul long dead were moved to live. But the oblivion that succeeds the fall had blotted the crowded tablets of the past. And all that was destroyed must be rebuilt, and old experience labored out once more. And similarly for us in our souls, we go from birth to birth, from body to body. We forget what our whole past birth and past life was, and we have to recollect and go through that again in the sense of the karma and the progress that we have to make. We have to sort of, from infant, from childhood, from birth to a long time, we have to again recollect what the soul has gained and lost. So really it's a similar thing of the universe too. So in a sense, these rhythms are not only universal and cosmic rhythms, they are also rhythms of life and death and birth and rhythms that we go through as human beings. As if soul long dead were moved to live, but the oblivion that succeeds the fall had blotted the crowded tablets of the past, and all that was destroyed must be rebuilt. Like we have to rebuild our lives. All that was destroyed, because whatever our gains were in our previous birth, we have to rebuild those gains in this birth. So, and all that was destroyed must be rebuilt, and old experience labored out once more. All can be done if the God touch is there. A hope stole in that hardly dared to be, amid the night's forlorn indifference. As if solicited in an alien world, with timid and hazardous instinctive grace, orphaned and driven out to seek a home, an errant marvel with no place to live, into a far-off nook of heaven there came a slow, miraculous gesture's dim appeal. The persistent thrill of a transfiguring touch persuaded the inert black quietude, and beauty and wonder disturbed the fields of God. A wandering hand of pale enchanted light that glowed along a fading moment's brink, fixed with gold panel in a pulsant hinge, a gate of dreams ajar on mystery's verge. One lucent corner, windowing hidden things, forced the world's blind immensity to sight. The darkness failed and slipped like a falling cloak from the reclining body of a god. So here is a description of the goddess, the Usha, coming of dawn from the darkness. The darkness failed and slipped like a falling cloak from the reclining body of a god. And again the beautiful description of in poetic verse. Then through the pallid rift that seemed at first hardly enough for a trickle from the suns, outpoured the revelation and the flame. The brief perpetual sign recurred above, a glamour from unreached transcendences, iridescent with the glory of the unseen, a message from the unknown, immortal light, ablaze upon creation's quivering edge. Dawn built her aura of magnificent hues and buried its seed of grandeur in the hours. So here comes the beginning of the first dawn of creation that the narrator Sri Aurobindo is describing. And dawn built her aura of magnificent hues and buried its seed of grandeur in the hours. And of course, with the coming of dawn, coming and the moment of time entered into creation. So here is a reference to that. And buried its seed of grandeur in the hours. An instant's visitor, the Godhead shone. On life's thin border, a while the vision stood, and bent over earth's pondering forehead curve. So it's almost like the earth, the forehead of earth. You can see the round curvature and bent over. So this is the first description of the coming of light from the reclining body of a god, the cloak falling. Extremely beautiful, mystic imagery that has multiple meanings. So it's also the coming of knowledge, it's the coming of the dawn of consciousness from the inconscient, it's the coming of time. The whole measure of time therefore takes place in creation from the inconscient, where there was no time and was the uncreated at that time. So the darkness falling. Lots and lots of levels of meaning here. On life's thin border, a while the vision stood, and bent over earth's pondering forehead curve, interpreting a recondite beauty and bliss. In colors, hieroglyphs of mystic sense, it wrote the lines of a significant myth, telling of a greatness of spiritual dawns. So in colors, hieroglyphs of mystic sense, it wrote the lines of a significant myth, telling of a greatness of spiritual dawns, a brilliant code penned with the sky for page. Almost that day the epiphany was disclosed, of which our thoughts and hopes are signal flares, a lonely splendor from the invisible goal almost was flung on the opaque inane. Once more a tread perturbed the vacant vasts. Infinity's centre, a face of rapturous calm, parted the eternal lids that open heaven. A form from far beatitude seemed to near, ambassadress twixt eternity and change. The omniscient goddess leaned across the breadths that wrapped the fated journeyings of the stars, and saw the spaces ready for her feet. Once she half looked behind for her veiled son, then, thoughtful, went to her immortal work. Again a reference to the goddess Usha, the goddess of dawn. Then, thoughtful, went to her immortal work. Earth felt the imperishable passage close. The waking ear of nature heard her steps, and wideness turned to her its limitless eye, and scattered on sealed depths her luminous smile, kindled to fire the silence of the worlds. Of course, this is the description of the first dawn of the goddess Usha, when she awakes and lights up the whole world, creation itself. And then, of course, in that coming of the dawn, every time is a symbol of this immortal beginning, immortal consciousness that has taken birth. So the waking ear of nature heard her steps, and wideness turned to her its limitless eye, and scattered in sealed depths her luminous smile kindled to fire the silence of the worlds. All grew a consecration and a rite. So this is, if you see even now, very, very early morning, the dawn, whenever it rises, there's almost like a sacredness to the beginning of life every single day. And especially when you're close to nature and away from, you can see it in its pristine purity. There is this repeated cycle of the awakening of consciousness, the awakening of the goddess every morning. Actually, it's a consecration and a rite. It's the real worship of the entire earth. When it pays obeisance to the supreme immortal presence of light of consciousness. So this is this description that Sri Aurobindo is giving in the first opening canto of the symbol dawn. That's why it's called the symbol dawn. Could have called it the dawn, but it's the symbol dawn. There is a symbolic meaning in this. So all grew a consecration and a rite. Air was a vibrant link between earth and heaven. The wide-winged hymn of a great priestly wind arose and failed upon the altar hills, Now, when you see this creation in this way, now you understand the worship, the real worship, and the real consecration that nature goes through each day. So the wide-winged hymn of a great priestly wind arose and failed upon the altar hills. The high boughs prayed in a revealing sky. Here, where our half-lit ignorance skirts the gulfs on the dumb bosom of the ambiguous earth. Here, where one knows not even the step in front, and truth has her throne on the shadowy back of doubt. On this anguished and precarious field of toil, outspread beneath some large, indifferent gaze, impartial witness of our joy and bale, our prostrate soil bore the awakening ray. So, here where our half-lit ignorance skirts the gulfs. So here is a reference of not only Earth's awakening, but also the awakening of consciousness in man, in human beings, on the dumb bosom of the ambiguous earth. Here, where one knows not even the step in front. Who doesn't know the step in front? We are the only wonderful creatures who have no idea what's going to happen the next moment in our lives. So here, where one knows not even the step in front, and truth has her throne on the shadowy back of doubt, on this anguished and precarious field of toil, outspread beneath some large indifferent gaze, impartial witness of our joy and bale, our prostrate soil bore the awakening ray. So again, the multiple meanings. Our prostrate soil bore the awakening ray. Incidentally, I think the name of our journal, The Awakening Ray, seems to have been taken from here. So now you understand the meaning. Our prostrate soil bore the awakening ray. Here too the vision and prophetic gleam lit into miracles, common meaningless shapes. Then the divine afflatus, spent, withdrew, unwanted, fading from the mortal's range. So when this awakening ray touched the prostrate soil to awaken it, the awakening ray is the ray of the dawn of the goddess of Usha that awakens the earth into consciousness, into light. Then, after a while, it spent, withdrew, unwanted, fading from the mortal's range, a sacred yearning. So it didn't fade away, it just faded from the mortal's range. We couldn't see it. A sacred yearning lingered in its trace, the worship of a presence and a power, too perfect to be held by death-bound hearts, the prescience of a marvelous birth to come. So when this awakening ray withdrew, in its place there came a sacred yearning, lingered in its trace, the worship of a presence and a power too perfect to be held by death-bound hearts, the prescience of a marvelous birth to come. Only a little the God light can stay. So these are these fabulous mantric utterances, one-liners that Sri Aurobindo has put across Savitri. All can be done if the God touch is there. Only a little the God light can stay. Because we notice that the prostrate earth, the soil, our consciousness, because we are also made of the same substance of matter. Matter cannot take the God light. It cannot absorb it. It is abstruse, and therefore only a little can it stay. It recedes back. Therefore this constant movement of progress and regress, you take once like a spiral, you go forward and then you go backwards, you go forwards and you go backwards. So there is this whole movement also in the earth that takes place, the rhythms of the earth, the night and day, the rhythms of nature, so light and darkness. So all of these are symbolic. This is what Sri Aurobindo is pointing to in the symbol dawn. Only a little the God light can stay. Spiritual beauty, illumining human sight, lines with its passion and mystery, matter's mask, and squanders eternity on a beat of time. As when a soul draws near the sill of birth, adjoining mortal time to timelessness, a spark of deity lost in matter's crypt. Its luster vanishes in the inconscient plains. That transitory glow of magic fire, so now dissolved in bright accustomed air. The message ceased, and waned the messenger. The single call, the unaccompanied power, drew back into some far-off secret world the hue and marvel of the supernal beam. She looked no more on our mortality. The excess of beauty, natural to God-kind, could not uphold its claim on time-born eyes. Too mystic real for space tenancy, her body of glory was expunged from heaven. The rarity and wonder lived no more. So here again, very, very mystic, occult experiences that Sri Aurobindo is alluding to through this physical description of the symbol dawn and the retreat of the light. It's like he says, when a soul is nearing its mortal birth into a human body, at that point it is in a space where it's on the sill of timelessness, eternity and time, transitoriness, and its deity, its presence, its divine presence, when it's in that moment of transition, gets lost in matter's crypt, and it actually dives down into the inconscient. In the same way, the light that comes on earth is the light of the divine presence of the divine, and that too gets absorbed into the inconscient of the earth. So there are several references here to both inner spiritual experiences, to the earth, to human nature, and so on and so forth. In fact, the first canto, Sri Aurobindo, I think he made number of drafts. I don't know how many, but more than a dozen, I'm told. He rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it and refashioned it and went into each and every word. He spent a lot of time writing this particular canto. And it seems almost simple, but each time he would rework it out. And there is a lot in this one canto, very pregnant, with full of knowledge. Her body of glory was expunged from heaven. The rarity and wonder lived no more. There was the common light of earthly day. So, even if you notice in the mornings when you wake up, or even when you have your inner experiences of illumination, you will see that there's a great heightened sense of light and beauty, the golden hue. And then after a while, that experience becomes part of the normal everyday humdrum life. It disappears. So every morning when even the earth, you see the early morning, how beautiful the earth is. And then by 10 o'clock or whatever, it's the common light of earthly day. So it sort of hides, it gets absorbed in it. So the same experience is what Sri Aurobindo is describing of the goddess, who then proceeds. Her body of glory was expunged from heaven. The rarity and wonder lived no more. There was the common light of earthly day, affranchised from the respite of fatigue. Once more, the rumour of the speed of life pursued the cycles of her blinded quest. All sprang to their unvarying daily acts. The 1,000 peoples of the soil and tree obeyed the unforeseeing instant's urge. And leader here, with his uncertain mind, alone, who stares at the future's covered face, man lifted up the burden of his fate. So here in this one line he introduces man, the human being. He is a leader here. First, of course, he talks about the 1,000 peoples of the soil and tree. As soon as the dawn recedes and the light of common day comes, you see all of nature is busy with its common activities, the animals, the birds, the trees, the flowers, everything is in constant buzzing activity. And then he says, and man too, with his uncertain mind, what does he do? He's alone staring at the covered face of future because he doesn't know one step or one instant of what is going to happen to him. Man, again, lifted up the burden of his fate. Now, this is, don't forget, the end of a description of the symbol dawn, the dawn of light, of consciousness on earth. So, after he says, man lifted up the burden of his fate, the next line Sri Aurobindo writes, And Savitri too awoke among these tribes, that hastened to join the brilliant summoner's chant, and, lured by the beauty of the apparent ways, acclaimed their portion of ephemeral joy. So I was reading yesterday a beautiful story that Amal Kiran was telling the students of in knowledge in school in Pondicherry. Nirodha had invited him to give a talk. So he was talking about Savitri there, and he was nice, very interesting story. There was this man who was sitting in the ashram, and he was sitting quietly, in his eyes he was looking up like this. So Amal Kiran went up to him and he tapped him on his shoulder and he said, "How are you today?" So he looked at him and he said, "I'm doing all right." But when Amal Kiran looked into his eyes, he saw this man was full of despair. His eyes were completely, full of pain. But he was just sitting there and staring into the space. So Amalda realized that there was something wrong. So he sat next to him and he put his hand, just said, "I want to tell you a story." So this man told her, he said, "What is the matter?" So this man told him, he said, I had some beautiful line that he said. He said, I have been damaged by some people I have allowed to enter into my life, and they have damaged my consciousness. And I'm feeling a terrible darkness, a terrible depression in my being, and I shouldn't have allowed these people to come in. Obviously had some reference to something that had happened in the past, recently. So Amalda sat down next to him. And you see, this is how important it is to be very vigilant about who you're with and who you speak to, who are the people you associate with. Be very conscious about these kinds of, they can come in with terrible hostile influences and disturb your consciousness. So this man was sitting, and actually you should read the exact story. It's quite revelatory, especially the words he uses. And then he said, I want to say something to you. So Amalda told him a story that happened to him in a similar way, something that had happened. I won't quote that. But at the end of the story, Amalda said to him, he said, when this happened to me, I also was very damaged. I also felt exactly how you are feeling. And then I started reading. I think somebody told him, I think it was Sri Aurobindo, somebody. He asked this man, he says, "Do you read Savitri?" So he said, "Yes, I am reading Savitri." So he says, "Do you read Savitri aloud?" So he said, "No, I don't read Savitri aloud, but I read Savitri and I'm reading Savitri." He says, "No, you must read Savitri aloud." So he said, "I'll tell you the reason." I think it was Sri Aurobindo who told Amal. There's again beautiful words. He said, when you read Savitri aloud, the words of Savitri are going through your own ears. You're listening to Savitri. Savitri has to be listened to. The words of Savitri cannot be understood except through the hearing, shotra. It's a sound of Savitri that travels into your own ear. And you listen to it through your own ears. And that is how you will understand Savitri. And the full power of Savitri will reveal itself to you. And then he started quoting a particular passage of Savitri, which Sri Aurobindo had asked him to read. And there was just this one line. He said, I was also in this terrible state of depression. And then when I read this one line, he said, something turned in my being. And the line is, even her abysses are tracks of light. So it was a line on Savitri where she said that even the deepest abyss in her were tracks of light. And this particular passage has been quoted often by Amalda, saying that Sri Aurobindo had told him that this was one passage that he wrote from the overmental consciousness, very high consciousness. So it has a great mantric power. And he says the mantric power of Savitri is through the spoken word. It's not through the eyes. You cannot just read Savitri. So this is extremely important why we have these study circles. And today when I was reading Savitri, I was actually listening to Savitri, the sound of Savitri, while my voice was reading. It's a very, very unique experience. Do it yourself. You will see the power that emanates from that reading. But it's worth reading that story. It's a new book. It's just been published. I don't think it's... out. But it's an interesting, some beautiful stories that Amal Kiran gives about how Savitri healed him from various falls. And once he fell into the trench, into a ditch, and everybody was passing him by. He was walking and he fell into this ditch, which was like a sewer, okay? And he said, I was sitting there at such excruciating pain. My left leg had completely turned around and got I just couldn't move it. And he said, I was sitting there looking, and one after the other, these ashramites are passing by, nobody's stopping. So he said, after about 5 minutes of watching all these people, he started yelling. He said, excuse me, will you please stop and help me? So one guy looks at him. He said, oh, yes, we've seen you. We thought you were enjoying sitting there, and you keep talking to everybody, so you must have found someone to talk to. So Amal Kiran was saying, these funny people, they just let him be. Then, of course, they hauled him up and brought him up, and he was in crutches, he was in bed. And then it was darshan time, and he sent a message through Udar to the mother saying that, how will I come and meet you and Sri Aurobindo? Sri Aurobindo was also alive at that time. So there was a joint, one of the darshan days, and he said, how will I come? I can't get out of bed. I've hurt my leg. So the mother said to tell Amal, he'll find a way. So when Amal heard that, he said, I have to find a way. So he called for crutches and he started walking up, going towards the staircase. The mother was sitting upstairs. Then somebody carried him up there. And when he said, I took so long, he could hardly walk. And Mother and Sri Aurobindo were at the end, sitting on the two, where they normally give darshan. And Amalda was walking in like this in front, going towards them. And he said, I went so slowly and painfully. But he said, I was enjoying it because there was nobody there. Only Mother and Sri Aurobindo, both looking at me intently and waiting for me to come. So it must have taken him 5 minutes to walk, or whatever minutes it took. And he said, all I saw was Sri Aurobindo looking at my leg. And he said, I kept thinking, he's concentrating on the wrong leg. It's not the left leg, it's the right leg, and he's concentrating on the wrong leg. But he said one day afterwards, when he got up next morning, he didn't need his crutches. He said he just got up with just a stick. And then he went to the mother and said, next morning, the mother said, so how are you? He said, Mother, I've actually fallen into an actual physical sewer. So Mother laughed and she said, okay, doesn't matter. How are you today? So he said, I'm very well. So he says, but shall I tell Sarah, his wife who was in Bombay, shall I tell her that I've fallen and hurt myself? So Mother said, no, why do you want to worry her? In 2 days you'll be walking fine. And he thought, what a prophecy she's giving me. In 2 days I'll be walking fine. 2 days later he writes, he says, unbelievable. No crutches, no stick, and he was bouncing along. So here is an example of spiritual force curing and healing the most physical pain and disease. So the leg. Now these are examples which you will read with these sadhaks, but it really, really fortifies your faith and makes you understand the power of Sri Aurobindo's magnus opus Savitri that he spent so many years. So, and Savitri too awoke among these tribes that hastened to join the brilliant summoner's chant, and, lured by the beauty of the apparent ways, acclaimed their portion of ephemeral joy, akin to the eternity when she came. No part she took in this small happiness, a mighty stranger in the human field. So from this dawn that he describes, the symbol dawn, there was the common light of earthly day. Once more the rumour of the speed of life pursued the cycles of her blinded quests. All sprang to their unwearying daily acts. So when this dawn arises, the daylight, and Savitri too awoke among these tribes. He also says that Savitri obviously was sleeping and she awoke among these tribes of men who were going about their daily life and the peoples of the soil and tree and so on. And Savitri too awoke among these tribes, but unlike them, no part she took in this small happiness, because she was akin to the eternity when she came. No part she took in this small happiness, a mighty stranger in the human field. The embodied guest within made no response. The embodied guest with a capital G refers to the divine presence within Savitri that was very conscious and completely identified with that. The embodied guest within made no response. The call that wakes the leap of human mind, its checkered eager motion of pursuit, its fluttering hued illusion of desire, visited her heart like a sweet alien note. So, all that is what we experience in our human life, desires and eager pursuit of our desires, also visited her heart, but like a sweet alien note. It was not something that was something she identified with or partook in. Time's message of brief light was not for her. In her there was the anguish of the gods, imprisoned in our transient human mold, the deathless conquered by the death of things. A vaster nature's joy had once been hers, but long could keep not its gold heavenly hue, or stand upon this brittle earthly base. So a vaster nature's joy had once been hers, but now it could not keep its gold heavenly hue upon this brittle earthly base of the human physical consciousness. A narrow movement on time's deep abyssum, life's fragile littleness denied the power, the proud and conscious wideness and the bliss she had brought with her into the human form. The calm delight that weds one soul to all, the key to the flaming doors of ecstasy. Earth's grain that needs the sap of pleasure and tears, rejected the undying rapture's boon, offered to the daughter of infinity, her passion flower of love and doom she gave. In vain now seemed the splendid sacrifice. So earth's grain, human nature, needs the sap of pleasure and tears to grow and to feel and to live. And it rejected the undying rapture's boon which was offered by Savitri, daughter of infinity, her passion flower of love and doom she gave. In vain now seemed the splendid sacrifice of the coming down into the human body of Savitri. In vain now seemed the splendid sacrifice, a prodigal of her rich divinity. Herself and all she was, she had lent to men, hoping her greater being to implant, and in their bodies' lives acclimatize, that heaven might native grow on mortal soil. Hard is it to persuade earth nature's change. Mortality bears ill the Eternal's touch. It fears the pure divine intolerance of that assault of ether and of fire. It murmurs at its sorrowless happiness, almost with hate repels the light it brings. It trembles at its naked power of truth and the might and sweetness of its absolute voice. Inflicting on the heights the abyssum's law, it sullies with its mire heaven's messengers. Its thorns of fallen nature are the defense it turns against the Saviour hands of grace. Its thorns of fallen nature are the defense it turns against the Saviour hands of grace. It meets the sons of God with death and pain. So all those who come as avatars, as saviors, it gives human nature, human beings give them in return for their sacrifice, death and pain, allusion to Christ's crucifixion, and all the others who have great saints, vibhutis, avatars, have all met the same kind of blind hatred and resistance of the human race. So it meets the sons of God with death and pain, a glory of lightnings traversing the earth scene, their sun thoughts fading, darkened by ignorant minds, their work betrayed, their good to evil turned, the cross their payment for the crown they gave. Only they leave behind a splendid name. So human beings, we like to worship the name, but actually we don't do any justice to the work or to the message, and neither do we try and live those in our lives. So that's an allusion to how human beings react to God's messengers who come down on earth. Their work betrayed, their good to evil turned, the cross their payment for the crown they gave. Only they leave behind a splendid name. A fire has come and touched men's hearts and gone. A few have caught flame and risen to greater life. Too unlike the world she came to help and save. So Savitri was too unlike the world she came to help and save. Don't forget, Savitri here is the avatar and is the Divine Mother's representative on earth. So a fire has come and touched men's hearts and gone. A few have caught flame and risen to greater life. Too unlike the world she came to help and save. Her greatness weighed upon its ignorant breast, and from its dim chasms welled a dire return. A portion of its sorrow, struggle, fall. To live with grief, to confront death on her road, the mortal's lot became the immortal's share. Thus trapped in the gin of earthly destinies, awaiting her ordeal's hour abode, outcast from her inborn felicity, accepting life's obscure terrestrial robe, hiding herself even from those she loved, the Godhead greater by a human fate. So this is how the divine Godhead enters into a human body terrestrial life, accepting life's obscure terrestrial robe. Obscure terrestrial robe is the body, hiding herself even from those she loved, the Godhead greater by a human fate. A dark foreknowledge separated her from all of whom she was the star and stay. So she was separated even from her own family, from her father and her mother and her friends and everybody, because of this foreknowledge she had, this divinity, because she was conscious of her true destiny, she was conscious of her fate, she was conscious of her mission. She was conscious of her purpose on earth, and she was conscious of the divine presence in her. She was completely identified with that. So even though she was in the outer ordinary life, playing, being with her friends, going out, doing everything internally, a dark foreknowledge separated her from all of whom she was the star and stay, too great to impart the peril and the pain. In her torn depths she kept the grief to come, as one who, watching over men, left blind, takes up the load of an unwitting race, harbouring a foe whom with her heart she must feed. Unknown her act, unknown the doom she faced, unhelped she must foresee and dread and dare. The long foreknown and fatal morn was here. So here was that morning when she has to face. The book starts with that morning of the time when Satyavan must die. So this is a reference to this. This is how Savitri is aware of this foreknowledge. She's aware that this is the day that Satyavan must die, and how she is completely not able to share that grief and that foreknowledge with anybody, and how she is actually harboring the foe's death and feeding it, even though she knew that she has to face it. So this is why these words have been given here. Harboring a foe whom with her heart she must feed. Unknown her act, unknown the doom she faced. So all around her was completely oblivious of what she was going through, the doom she had to face. Nobody had any idea. There was an unwitting race that she was in the midst of. The long foreknown and fatal morn was here, bringing a noon that seemed like every noon. For nature walks upon her mighty way, unheeding when she breaks a soul, a life. Leaving her slain behind, she travels on. Man only marks, and God's all-seeing eyes. Even in this moment of her soul's despair, Savitri's soul's despair, in its grim rendezvous with death and fear, no cry broke from her lips, no call for aid. She told the secret of her woe to none. Calm was her face, and courage kept her mute. Yet only her outward self suffered and strove. because even her humanity was half divine. So obviously, outward self is the human mortal self that obviously suffered. The inner being, of course, was totally, was the divine itself. Calm was her face and courage kept her mute. Yet only her outward self suffered and strove. Even her humanity was half divine. So even this outward self was half divine. Her spirit opened to the spirit in all. Her nature felt all nature as its own. Apart, living within, all lives she bore. Aloof, she carried in herself the world. Her dread was one with the great cosmic dread. Her strength was founded on the cosmic mights. The universal mother's love was hers. Against the evil at life's afflicted roots, against the evil at life's afflicted roots, her own calamity, its private sign. What is her own calamity? That her husband, who she's married, must die today. Her own calamity, its private sign. Of her pangs she made a mystic poignant sword, a solitary mind, a world-wide heart. To the lone immortal's unshared work she rose. At first, life grieved not in her burdened breast. On the lap of earth's original somnolence, inert, released into forgetfulness, prone it reposed, unconscious on mind's verge, obtuse and tranquil like the stone and star. In a deep cleft of silence, twixt two realms, she lay remote from grief, unsown by care, nothing recalling of the sorrow here. So similarly, like the beginning of the symbol dawn, when the dawn light itself was in that unconscious phase, it lay prone, asleep, somnambulist. In the same way, Savitri is also in the beginning, before she became conscious and came down and everything, the same symbol is being used here. So it's very similar to the way it begins. So this is a very interesting way of explaining that, Sri Aurobindo adopts. On the lap of earth's original somnolence, inert, released into forgetfulness. So when she was born, prone at repose, unconscious on mind's verge, obtuse and tranquil like the stone and star. In a deep cleft of silence twixt two realms, she lay remote from grief, unsown by care, nothing recalling of the sorrow here. Then you see, it's like when you wake up from sleep every day, you don't recall what is awaiting you. Even the grief that you have had, for that moment when you wake up, leaves you. In the same way, when Savitri wakes up, the same experience she has is when the world wakes up, when creation wakes up. So these are enormous parallels of symbols and very occult, very mystic. You have to read them again and again to understand how beautifully Sri Aurobindo has woven the poetry into the symbol of the dawn, and the dawn of awakening, both of not only of light but also of grief, because in that unconscious moment from sleep to awakening, there is this unconsciousness protects you from even the terrible grief that is going to befall her. So there is a reason for this unconsciousness that we have in our natures. If we were fully conscious, we wouldn't be able to bear the kind of pain that and the kind of grief that knowledge brings, foreknowledge brings. While Savitri married him, knew that having the only soul that she was one with, they were two in one, was going to die. But that moment between sleep and awakening, that was a moment of forgetfulness, even that moment. That's just that moment. So again, Sri Aurobindo is not only speaking of a physical movement, but also a psychological state. So not only Savitri is a representative here. The world is like that. So, in a deep cleft of silence, twixt two realms, she lay remote from grief, unsown by care, nothing recalling of the sorrow here. Then a slow, faint remembrance, shadow-like moved, and sighing she laid her hand upon her bosom, and recognized the close and lingering ache deep, quiet, old, made natural to its place, but knew not why it was there, nor whence it came. The power that kindles mind was still withdrawn. Heavy, unwilling, were life's servitors, like workers with no wages of delight. Sullen the torch of sense refused to burn. The unassisted brain found not its past. Only a vague earth nature held the frame. But now she stirred. Her life shared the cosmic load. At the summons of her body's voiceless call, her strong, far-winging spirit travelled back. Now she stirred. It was that moment of awakening when you move. And as she moved, what happened? Her life shared the cosmic load. At the summons of her body's voiceless call, her strong, far-winging spirit travelled back to the yoke of ignorance and fate, back to the labor and stress of mortal days, lighting a pathway through strange symbol dreams across the ebbing of the seas of sleep. Her house of nature felt an unseen sway, illumined swiftly were life's darkened rooms, and memory's casements opened on the hours, and the tired feet of thought approached her doors. All came back to her, earth and love and doom. The ancient disputants encircled her like giant figures wrestling in the night. What were these giant figures? The ancient disputants, love and death, love and doom. The ancient disputants encircled her. Earth, why he mentions earth is because she's come back into the earth. That spirit has returned. And the ancient disputants encircled her like giant figures wrestling in the night. The Godheads from the dim, inconscient born, these Godheads from the dim, inconscient born awoke to struggle and the pang divine. And in the shadow of her flaming heart, at the somber center of the dire debate, a guardian of the unconsoled abyss, inheriting the long agony of the globe, a stone-still figure of high and godlike pain, stared into space with fixed, regardless eyes that saw grief's timeless depths but not life's goal. And in the shadow of her flaming heart, at the somber center of the dire debate, a guardian of the unconsoled abyss, inheriting the long agony of the globe, a stone-still figure, high and godlike pain, stared into space with fixed, regardless eyes that saw grief's timeless depths but not life's goal. Afflicted by his harsh divinity, bound to his throne, he waited unappeased. The daily oblation of her unwept tears, all the fierce question of man's hours relived. He waited unappeased the daily oblation of her unwept tears. This was a sacrifice that he waited for, that stone-like, pain. You can see the Godhead of pain stood there still, waiting for her unwept tears. The daily oblation of her unwept tears, all the fierce question of man's hours relived, the sacrifice of suffering and desire. Earth offers to the immortal ecstasy. So this sacrifice of suffering and desire, earth offers to the immortal ecstasy. It starts from the cosmic level of the earth, comes to the sacrifice into the human level. So there is this Godhead, this godlike pain, the stone-still figure of high and godlike pain that sits bound to his throne. He waits unappeased for all this, for this sacrifice to take place. The sacrifice of suffering and desire, earth offers to the immortal ecstasy, began again beneath the eternal hand. Awake she endured the moment's serried march, and looked on this green, smiling, dangerous world, and heard the ignorant cry of living things, Amid the trivial sounds, the unchanging scene, her soul arose confronting time and fate. Immobile in herself, she gathered force. This was the day when Satyavan must die.